Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Brodo Fantasy Football Podcast presented by BrodoFantasy.com and the Fantasy Football by Brodo app, the only tool you need to dominate fantasy football. Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah.
I hope you have enjoyed the Dynasty Don. Matt working round the clock. That guy is an absolute content machine. We love that guy around here.
With the Mad Jester on the Monday pod. That was a fun one to listen to, especially with Dynasty drafts coming up. It's a best and worst picks of a Dynasty mock. So if you have Dynasty drafts coming up, if you're in the Dynasty mood, if you're just being introduced to Dynasty leagues, definitely go check that out. It's a very good starting point.
It's an interesting time right now because we are definitely in the lull. Right, I wouldn't say we're in the nothing's going on because the draft is at the end of this month. Right now, at the time of recording, it's April 6th, so the draft is at the end of this month.
Nearly 3 week 28th it starts, right? So almost exactly 3 weeks away tomorrow.
Right. So, but we, Matt is our dynasty man. He's our rookie guy. Like, I've gotten so much better at predicting rookies in the last 2 years since we've brought Matt onto the podcast because of, like, the guy just knows the formulas to who's going to hit and who's not going to hit. And one of the formulas on these rookies that you can use to compare these rookies is up and running right now on the Fantasy Football by Brodo app, and is the player comps. If you don't know, our player comps are comparable to 5 players. That's right, 5, not just one like these other people do. And even the one that the other people do is just like, oh, this guy is 6'2", 210 pounds. Let's just project him as a comparable to another guy who's 6'2" and 210 pounds.
That's how you get the Jeff Janis is the next Devontae Adams idiots out there.
Right. So we don't do that. What we do is we have a proprietary formula. Shout out to Cass, our mathematician. And what he does is he has a formula that takes all of their excuse me, Michael, take this over.
Takes their Tim's having a coughing fit. If you're watching the video, this is hilarious to see as Tim just like leans over. But anywho, yeah, it takes their measurables, their production. Obviously, it's a proprietary formula. We're not going to give you the whole shebang, but it mixes all that with certain percentages, weighing each factor separately based on previous fantasy football production models. It's not a simple formula at all. It's made and created by us for you Brodo fanatics, and I mean it really is. It's awesome.
And if you go back,
not just tooting our own horns, it's very, very cool, and it's completely original compared to other player comps that just look at, look, he's 6'2", he's 6'2", he runs a 4.3 40, he runs a 4.3 40. They must be the same player, because we all know that's not how the NFL works.
Right. And not only do we do that, we have you 5 people that you can compare them to, and the percentages too. So this person is more comparable to X person, Y person, etc.
Bijan Robinson about to be a star.
Oh my God. Bijan Robinson's comps are crazy.
Yeah. Breece Hall's,
Marshawn Lynch.
Breece Hall's were equally as impressive last year, and Breece Hall was balling out before he got injured.
Garrett Wilson's as well. Chris Olave's as well. So this is a very... Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold, as you guys know, if you heard that. But very, very good. Go check it out. The Fantasy Football by Brodo app. Free for a limited time, people.
All right, Tim. We
not to give the curtain away too much, but free for a limited time, a little more confirmed today.
Yeah. But we
that's why I'm wearing this button down.
We both were sick last week. We decided to go with a special Patreon preview pod because we couldn't get behind the mic with the sniffles and the grossness, especially now that we record ourselves as well with the video. It would have been like 2 minutes. I would have been disgusted just looking at myself and you. I'm not even gonna do a fake. I hate sniffles in the mic so much. I'm not even gonna do a fake one.
Michael is the worst. Every time, like we would have, like, we had video calls, so again, like, we were in contact a lot, and this is around the time of year where Brodo, although the content is coming fast and coming quick, you didn't see us on the mic for 2 weeks, but that doesn't mean we're on vacation for 2 weeks. We'll probably work harder in this time of year than any other type of year in terms of the brand, in terms of the new tools that we're going to give you, and working with everyone. So we're very excited for the future of Brodo. And when we're talking about the future, seamless transition. The NFL draft exemplifies the future, right? And one thing that you're getting here, which by the way, can I just say something? All of these people in Dynasty that were telling you trade everything for 2023 picks because 2023 is the draft and 2022 not so much. After seeing what the rookie production was in 2022 and now seeing the kind of the
The 2023
the 2023 class
or the
and their
projections of
projections.
it.
There you go. The projections of it. I would have rather been in that 2022 draft. Just me. But
I
it
mean,
begs the question.
you were able to get in several drafts a Garrett Wilson or a Chris Olave like late in the first round,
Oh yeah,
which
yeah,
is just glorious at this point.
yeah, and that kind of informs what we're doing today. So one of my favorite things to do is to go back and watch old drafts because it really shows you not only where the analysts were wrong, but where the scouting teams are wrong, what they were looking at that made them wrong, and on the opposite, what made them right. Right. The reason why wrong is in front is because today we're going to be looking at the 2015 draft, and the reason we're going to be looking at the 2015 draft is twofold. Number one, because it's 8 seasons later, so we now have a pretty good idea of who these, well, not only a pretty good idea, we know for sure who these people are, and we have a pretty good idea of how their career arc is going to end, even if it didn't end already. Number two, and I want to say this because as the resident running backs matter person in this operation, all right, not like Michael, who's zero running back all day.
You know how to piss me off before we really get
I'm going to
into the
say this
nitty
one
gritty.
thing because these are based on articles, by the way. The Fantasy Football Brodo at brotofantasy.com. My article will be up shortly about recapping the 2015 draft. Today, we're going to recap the 2015 draft. That's like the sister pod to the article. And the reason we're doing it is not just because I wrote an article about it. It's because we want to inform you of what to look for in this draft and how to like, hey, just because these guys look great on paper, not all the hype is always going to be real, right? Not all the hype is always going to be there. So in this particular draft, one thing that I hate is people who say, I'm not picking running backs early because they're only going to give me 5 years of good production and everyone else is going to give me 20 years. That is the biggest pile of horseshit ever. And I just want to put that out there.
That weird ass accent was a pile of horseshit too. I don't know what you were trying to do.
Now, I will say this. Wide receivers have more longevity. Okay, that's without a doubt. But you got to pick the right receivers.
True
and so picking a guy in this draft like Todd Gurley, right, who shined very bright, right, might have been a better idea than drafting some of these highly touted wide receivers. And we're going to get into that, or quarterbacks even. And we're going to get into that. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to get into the 2015 draft. We're going to recap the 2015 draft, and then we're going to redraft, taking one pick each, based solely on fantasy, on what order these guys actually should have went in your dynasty startups or your I guess we got to say dynasty startups because it's a long-term thing, right? So let's get started. The way we're going to recap this is we're going to go down the list in order of these guys, and I'm going to give you their fantasy grades. Now, if you don't know fantasy grades already, that's also on the app. It's also a proprietary tool done by our mathematician, Santiago Casanova, that gives someone a grade. It's a metric that assigns a letter grade based on the player's overall fantasy output and how it's stacked up against others in the position. Also, it tries to, it doesn't try to, I mean, I guess tries to is the right word because
it considers ADP.
It considers ADP. It considers what their expectations were, but it also considers future production, right? So if someone has put together 3 straight seasons of goodness, they're more likely to put together a 4 straight season of goodness rather than someone who just like had a bad year, had a good year, had a bad year, right? So these are all in the grade, not to mention their fantasy production. So let's get started with the 2015 draft and pick one, round 1. Jameis Winston, quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. His career average fantasy grade ended up being a C. 71.5 overall for 7 eligible seasons. His highest single season fantasy grade, A+. A 96 in 2019. His lowest single season fantasy grade, an F. in 2020. Excuse me. So, I mean, if nothing else, Winston's career has been highly entertaining. Michael, did he live up to the hype, in your opinion?
So, look, clearly, Jameis Winston didn't live up to the hype. Otherwise, he would have been the franchise quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But that 2019 season and a couple other seasons where he wasn't atrocious was one of the most fun seasons probably from a quarterback that we've seen. He threw 30 touchdowns, but he also threw 30 interceptions. The only quarterback to ever do it. 5,100 passing yards that year, 32 touchdowns to be exact. Like he was just slinging the ball like there was no tomorrow. And for him, there was no tomorrow because he now does not really play. But
I mean,
it was a
he has a unique career arch in general because if you
yeah.
remember, he was suspended the first 4 games of the season before that. And he's had 2 A-graded seasons. But the reason why you don't remember the season before that is because it was one of the most strangest fantasy seasons of all time. If you remember, he actually split starting quarterback duties with Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2018. Do you remember that, Michael? That was the year where no matter who the
Vaguely.
starting quarterback was, Ryan Fitzpatrick or Jameis Winston, they were likely to get a QB1 finish.
Just slinging it with Bruce
Just
Arians.
absolutely slinging it with Bruce Arians. And then, of course, his A+ season came when you said the 30 for 30. The problem is the 30 for 30 season.
QB5 overall, he
Yeah,
was that year.
QB5 overall. And the 30 for 30 season, that's great for fantasy because, interceptions in some leagues are -1, some leagues -2. In -1 leagues, it's only minus 30 points. So he threw 30 interceptions. 30 touchdowns, 30 points being gone, at 5,100 yards. I mean, that equals a 4,500 yard, 27 touchdown season with no interceptions, which
Yeah.
is, QB5.
Glorious.
Yeah, glorious. So, for those who don't know, he's actually currently signed on with the Saints.
Yeah, I was disappointed in Jameis for just agreeing to be a backup again in New Orleans. Like he said last year, he wanted to start. He was like, it sucks when you get injured and you lose your job. That's kind of what happened. Andy Dalton basically took his job away from him when he was hurt. And I was like, all right, New Orleans, I'll stay with you again, even though you just traded and like for a quarterback that's going to be your franchise QB for the next 4 years. What are you going to do?
I mean,
I was just surprised by that. Like if Baker Mayfield's out here getting starting quarterback offers and we see Sam Howell, like
Andy Dalton, who's probably going to start unless they start CJ Stroud or Bryce Young in the first game. He'll probably start a couple games.
Maybe Sam Darnold in San Fran with the injuries to the young QBs, Lance and Purdy. Like it was just a little strange for me to see Jameis Winston decide to just stay with New Orleans and continue being a backup. But a backup quarterback is one of the best jobs in the entire world. You're not getting knocked around and you're getting paid millions.
I just want to say this, Michael. If Sam Darnold ends up taking that job and leading the 49ers next year with the great stats, I'm going to be insufferable. Absolutely insufferable.
I think any single quarterback would ball out in that system at this point, and Sam Darnold is certainly capable. I think he'd ball out in the San Fran. I have him in our dynasty league together. It's Darnold. So for sale, Tim, if you want him, come get him.
Maybe I'll throw a third
Rip
round
him
pick
from
at
my
you.
hands. A third round pick. I'm thinking like the 102.
You're thinking terribly. All right. Speaking of the 102, it's a quarterback as well. The Tennessee Titans select quarterback Marcus Mariota with the second pick, and even though only one pick separated these two quarterbacks, it was a lot different of a career for them. Mariota definitely profiled as the better fantasy player because he was a dual threat quarterback in college, but unfortunately that never came to a prediction. Fruition. He had solid numbers. His highest single season fantasy grade was a C in 2015, but his lowest single season fantasy grade was an F. And if you average all of his years together, his average grade was an F, only 41.1 on a scale of 0 to 100. And just so you know, there is a threshold here. You have to have played in at least 5 games in the season to get graded and scored over 6 points per game. If you didn't score 6 points per game, you're not even an F. You're worse than an F.
Yeah,
Tim you're completely unusable.
Tim had to look that up for a player to be named later.
Oh, I mean, many players to be named later. This draft was
True.
not pretty.
Yeah.
But yeah, Mariota lost his job to Ryan Tannehill. Shout out to Ryan Tannehill, the true value king. Jason
Yeah.
totally called that. And had a chance to start again last year. And largely faltered.
Was
He was a useful,
equally inept.
exactly. He was a useful streamer for a few games, but lost his starting job after a 1916 loss to Pittsburgh. Right now, going into next season, he signed on to back up Jalen Hurts with the Eagles, which I think is a good fit. You know, it's a very smooth like backup operation where you don't have to change the offense, like you did with Gardner Minshew, who didn't have any running capabilities. But yeah, Marcus Mariota, Michael, if you were the Tennessee Titans, how you feeling about that pick that
I
year?
mean, clearly an F grade, clearly a failed attempt at getting a franchise quarterback. There's no other way to sugarcoat it. Mariota was a bust for fantasy and for the NFL. Fantasy wise, for him not even to have a single like actually usable season with his rushing ability too is just a huge letdown.
Again, just so you guys know, we're having no offensive linemen, no defenders. You know, this is just fantasy
Fantasy baby.
eligible players. Which the first tight end that got drafted off the board in this draft, can you guess who it was, Michael?
I know the answer.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
CJ Uzuma in the 5th round was the
Zama.
first, not the first tight end off the board, excuse me, but the only fantasy viable tight end in this entire class. So it gives you a good idea what this class was like. So let's get into the next pick. First round, pick number 4, Amari Cooper, wide receiver of the Oakland Raiders. His career fantasy grade has been a B over 8 eligible seasons. And I got to say, nothing screams B like Amari Cooper.
I was gonna say you can't get more B than Amari Cooper. If we're
His
being
highest,
honest.
Michael, I don't know if you know the answer to this. Do you know what his highest graded fantasy year ever was?
Um, I'd assume last season based on his ADP.
Yeah, last season. Last season it was an A minus, 87.7 overall. And his lowest was a D minus in 2017, but that was an injury hampered year. You know, Cooper had a lot of productive seasons, but we've mentioned this many times. He disappears in certain situations. When he plays good cornerbacks, he usually disappears. And really, this year was a really good indication of that. Despite his A minus grade, he had moments of high and moments of low. He was a weekly wide receiver 1 6 times or better this season, but finished below a top 36 options 8 times. Now,
Classic Amari Cooper.
classic Amari Cooper, and classic Amari Cooper because of the circumstances, 6 of those came on the road. So basically every time Amari Cooper was on the road, except 2 games, you knew to bench him. So he's been a solid producer, but never lived up to the 4th overall pick by the Raiders. All that hype coming out. All that hype coming out. Michael, what is your thoughts on Mr. Cooper?
I like you can't call Amari Cooper a bust, right? You can't. He's been a very, very solid NFL wide receiver, but you can absolutely say that he's been a bit of a disappointment relative to what people expected out of Alabama. Like he isn't that A1 superstar, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Devontae Adams, even Stephon Diggs type of guy who we'll be talking about him later. But he's a very, very good, I'd say 1B type receiver. You don't get that star quality out of him, but he's a very, very good fantasy wide receiver. Real life wide receiver. Fantasy, he's more consistent. I think a B grade is about as perfect as a grade as you could give Amari Cooper in all aspects of his being.
I will say this. We're only going to go over the first round. I should have caveated that, except for running backs. Running backs, we're going to go into the second round because the second round is basically the first round for running backs. So we're going to go into the second round for running backs, but only the first round we're going to go. But we're also going to highlight some of the notable players that got drafted afterwards. And you'll see in this draft, he was not the best wide receiver taken, but he was certainly the best wide receiver taken in the first round. And one of the easiest comparisons to make on who's better, Kevin White was the round 1 pick 7 of the Chicago Bears. Now, I will say this. Kevin White has had 0 eligible seasons for fantasy grade.
He is the player that you had to look up the limitations for.
I mean, it was like I'm trying to look for him on the grades. I'm like, yo, Kevin White's missing. Like, I know it's not a big deal, but damn, I got to hit up Cass. And then it's like, oh, this is why. Like I said, he has no average. And he was once dubbed the next Andre Johnson. Think about this: 6'3", 216 pounds, dude. 6'3". Now, it should be mentioned that injuries were a major factor. And he has played the last 2 seasons. Do you know what team he's played for the last 2 seasons, Michael?
The Bears,
Saints.
right?
No, he's been playing. He was
He
drafted.
went from the Bear. He went from the Bears to the Saints, right? Yeah, the
Yeah.
Saints. He caught a touchdown, right, last year, I believe.
No, 0 career
No.
touchdowns. He caught a catch last year.
Oh wow.
And everyone was like, "Oh my
so it
God,
was a
Kevin White."
catch.
In his entire career, he has 28 receptions for 397 yards in 30 games over 6 seasons. So it's fair to say that not only is Kevin White a bust, I heard that if you go in the mirror in Chicago and say the name Kevin White 3 times, you automatically drop whatever you're holding. For the next 6 years. So be careful. It's bad luck.
If you're listening from Chicago, do not go to your closest mirror.
All right, so let's get into a hit in this. Round 1, pick 10. And again, running back propaganda, baby, because the first round was a running back treasure trove, as it usually is. Usually when you have a running back drafted in the first round, as you'll see as these articles and these episodes come out, you are going to be in good shape because the hit rate on first round running backs is ridiculous. Round 1, pick 10 by the St. Louis Rams. That's right, St. Louis at the time. Todd Gurley. Do you know what also stands out? There are 3 teams that are no longer the teams that they were at the time of this draft. And this is only 8 years ago. A lot of change in terms of that.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, Todd Gurley's average fantasy grade, B in 6 seasons, but that's only because he fizzled out pretty bad in the last couple seasons. His highest single season fantasy grade was A+. Now, not only was it A+ in 2017, he recorded a 99.8 overall fantasy grade. 99.8, nearly perfect, and there's a reason.
One of the highest on record, as you can assume.
Yeah, and he had an A the second year as well in 2018, and that stretch, 2017, 2018, Gurley was an absolute beast. During this time, he totaled just under 4,000 all-purpose yards. That's an average of 2,000 all-purpose yards a year, and 40 touchdowns. During that stretch, he finished outside of a weekly RB1 only 5 times. And outside of a playable running back, top 36, 1 time in 2 years. 1 time. During that time, he went on an absolutely ludicrous 15-game run of consecutive RB1 finishes. 15 games over 2 seasons. Unfortunately, Gurley had an arthritic knee, and it just robbed him of his juice. The next season afterwards, 2019, there was a clear step back that he took. Then he went to Atlanta. Everyone was pretty excited about that, and totaled just 842 yards from scrimmage in his last year. Now, it should be noted that he still scored touchdowns during those times. So it took his speed, it took his quickness away, but he was still a monster. So the Gurley story is always a what could have been story, but in his prime, Todd Gurley was arguably one of the best fantasy players we've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to see is the 99.8 fantasy grade. Like you said, over his entire career, it was really only the 2 super standout seasons, which is why he has like a B fantasy grade for his career with only 6 eligible seasons. Very unfortunate, the injury that he got hit with where he just couldn't use his legs anymore. But Tim, that's the fear with running backs. Now that they don't matter, even when they're stars like Todd Gurley, after those 2 years, he was a completely different player. But nonetheless,
it should be noted that there were dynasty players out there who were like, oh, should I go with Todd Gurley or the other running back we're going to talk about? Or should I go with Kevin White?
I mean, yeah, it's not a perfect science.
No, it is not. That's why it's the best. All right, let's get into our next pick. Round 1, pick 14, Devontae Parker, wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins. His average career fantasy grade is a D. 60.3 is the number in 7 eligible seasons. His lowest single season grade was last season. He got an F, a 31.3 rating. His highest grade was in his contract year with the Dolphins, 89.1, an A- in 2019. So, I mean, the highlight of his career was when Ryan Fitzpatrick was under center. And there is something to be said about Devontae Parker never really playing with a good quarterback, established quarterback in his entire career, where Ryan Fitzpatrick was the most consistent quarterback that he had. So when he did have that 1 year of Ryan Fitzpatrick, career high 128 targets. He earned himself a 4-year contract extension. And a lot of it was because that was a bad team. And Ryan Fitzpatrick would just throw the ball up to him. And that's where he does his damage. It is also to mention that some people just do more damage in their contract years, and that's what we saw. But he would never eclipse 793 yards and 4 touchdowns in a single season outside of that season. It seems like it might be the end of the road for Devontae Parker at this time. And you got to say overall, outside of that one season where people had already given up. Excuse me. Comes out of nowhere. People have already given up on him. So it was a nice sleeper season that year. Michael, take it away.
Yeah, it's another unfortunate bust type of player here. An average fantasy grade of D. I think that translates pretty well to his career as well. Besides that 2019 season, he was always a why isn't he better type of player. Like, he was always on the breakout candidate list for everybody, and it never came to fruition. And now, not only is he in a New England Mac Jones led offense, he's just constantly getting injured now, and it does seem like the days of Devontae Parker being a startable fantasy asset are over, and his career has been a bit of a letdown.
If you're not on YouTube, it's worth it to be on YouTube just so you could see me like try to get out of the screen while I have my coughing fits, and then come back with a completely red face and bloodshot eyes and just try and act like everything's okay. Like that's
So what are you actually doing when you leave the camera lens, Tim?
I'm like I'm taking care of the phlegm in different ways off camera. I'm just gonna keep that there. All right. After Devontae Parker, the pick after would have been a better pick. Melvin Gordon, running back.
Melvin.
Yes, right. San Diego Chargers. His highest single fantasy grade, A+, 96.7 in 2018. His lowest single season fantasy grade, an F, 22.4 last season. And his average grade, B-, 74.5 in 7 eligible seasons. Now, Gordon went from baller to bust. I mean, bust to baller very quickly. In his rookie year, he failed to qualify for a grade. So it's 7 eligible seasons because it's actually his rookie year that didn't count. An infamous 0 touchdown rookie season. Infamous. But he overcorrected big time. From 2016 to 2018, Gordon was an absolute touchdown machine. He had 38 touchdowns in that time while averaging over 100 yards per scrimmage from scrimmage per game. But that was started to go downhill again. Like Michael said, the bad thing for running backs in 2019, he got an injury, still scored 9 TDs in 11 games as a starter, but the Chargers decided to move forward with Austin Eckler and move Gordon to the Broncos, and Gordon moved to the Broncos. He did have his shine a little bit with the Broncos, 2 more seasons of low-end RB2 before he was absolutely demolished last year. One of the most sad moments and one of the moments I'm going to remember is when the Chargers decided that they were going to put Melvin Gordon with a clown face on the big screen when he was facing them because he was inexplicably benched by Nathaniel Hackett and that completely ridiculous operation they had with the Broncos last year. So it's not, he seems like a good dude and he's had a good career. So it's hard to see him go out like that, but he did have the last laugh. Literally, he joined with the Chiefs and got himself a ring. And actually, when they asked him, there's an interview that's like, what was different between this season and previous season? And he said, well, I ain't do shit. I got carried to a ring. And they started laughing hysterically. So when you put in your work like that, you get your ring. And it's unclear if he's going to play this year. But if he didn't, solid career for Melvin Gordon, who I think the Chargers would go ahead and pick him again in that spot again and again and again.
I don't know about that. 15th overall. You could tell this is a different time, even though it was just 8 years ago in 2015 with 2 running backs going in the top 15.
You're going to see the way that running backs are drafted change tremendously as we go through this because we're going to be doing the 2016, 17, and 18 draft, maybe even stick 19 in there. I don't know if 19 is a little too early, but at least 16, 17, and 18 as well. So we can look back and learn from the past. But I mean, if you were, let's say, if you were a dynasty manager at least, and you're getting the hype, and he's the second running back off the board, you're happy if you picked him number 2 overall. He had a solid career, and he put up big numbers for you for a while in terms of running backs.
Yeah. Look, he had a very solid career, pretty touchdown dependent at times. I don't think he ever established himself as like a superstar running back in the league. He was more of like a superstar fantasy player because he was finding the end zone so much. But I don't think he was ever on the rushing level of some of these guys like the Nick Chubbs of the world or the receiving level of guys like the CMC. But I mean, he got it done. He was more of he was in a tremendous offense and he was asked to do a lot and he lived up to that billing.
Fucking Michael, man. He didn't really he was on the level of the
I'm
best
saying
current rusher in the league, and he wasn't on the level of the best current receiver in the league.
if you're
Running back.
picked 15th overall, it's not he wasn't special in any area.
He was a solid contributor, especially for your
He
fantasy
was.
squad.
He was a very solid player.
And that's what we care about. All right. So I'm not going to waste a lot of time going individual, but I will say this. The next few picks,
Disgusting.
first and second round, all busts. We got Nelson Aguilar for the Eagles. Career average fantasy grade F, highest C- in 2017. Round 1 pick 26 for the Ravens.
Surprised he even got that high C-, if I'm being honest.
I agree. Brashad Perriman, F, over 4 seasons. Highest grade
forget
F, lowest grade F.
That 47.5 F is because of that massive 4-game stretch at the end of the year. I'll never forget that.
Well, the 4-game stretch you could do because it was definitely a 4-game stretch, but that first game he was like only a low end wide receiver 2. It was really a 3-game stretch where he was ridiculous. He ended each game as a wide receiver 2 or better, and that included one wide receiver 2 overall finish, 3 TDs and 113 yards when both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were out, and Jameis Winston was just slanging the ball all over the field. He got himself a contract with the Jets out of that 3-game stretch.
It blows my mind how things like that happen, like these massive games, stretches, seasons. The Peyton Hillises of the world, the Gary Barnages, the Brashad Perrimans, the Terrell Pryors. Like, I just don't get it. Mentally, I don't understand in my head how someone could be this good for this small of a stretch or for an entire season and never be able to come close to reproducing it. I just don't understand how it's possible.
Dude, Terrell Pryor is one of the saddest stories in the NFL. That guy,
Why?
man.
What do you mean? He turned into a wide receiver, put up 1,000-yard season, but then he was toast. Like, what happened?
Because he had to. Because what happened was he was the best quarterback in college football. And then he got suspended. Do you know why? Do you remember why he got suspended?
Weed?
No. That would have been, even though that's crazy too, that would have been a little more understanding. Dude, he signed a jersey in exchange for tattoos. And the NCAA said that he was making money off his likeness and suspended him, bro. So now you're not playing quarterback for an entire season. He's an athletic freak. Now he gets drafted by the Raiders in the compensation draft. I mean, in the like auxiliary draft that they do in the 3rd round. They gave a 3rd round pick for him, and he had to convert to a wide receiver. He never gave himself a chance. The NCAA fucked him, bro.
If he was good enough at QB, it was always a question. He was an athletic type of guy, but he wasn't a quarterback.
He was ahead of his time. If he was in the draft this year, like
he could be like a
a better thrower.
He's more of a Taysom Hill than an Anthony Richardson.
No, man, he was fast as hell, and he had a crazy strong arm.
Yeah, I think you're overestimating his QB abilities, but nonetheless, we're going on a tangent about Terrell Pryor now.
I'm sorry. I've been personally what led to this content is, like I said, I've been taking in old drafts. So like I love looking at old drafts. And one of the real Terrell Pryor is one of the real sad stories in the NFL, in my opinion. All right, let's continuing sad stories in the NFL. Excuse me. Round 1, pick 29, Philip Dorsett.
Goodness gracious.
Wide receiver of the Indianapolis Colts. Career fantasy grade was an F. Highest grade was an F.
I mean, if I remember correctly, this was before we had the app, before we had our our stats, our analytical packages and such. But I can almost guarantee Philip Dorsett going in the 1st round would have been a huge head scratcher.
That was a reach. So
Yeah. It
it
was
was
just
very
another one of those. Oh, he's so fast. Maybe we
right.
could turn him into a good player.
It was a McCole Hardman type situation where they're like, all right, we have Andrew Luck, and we need to get him a speedster. So they just did. By the way, one weekly wide receiver one finish in his entire career so far. So let's get into round two now. 36 pick overall, TJ Yeldon, Alabama running back to the Jacksonville Jaguars. His career fantasy grade was a D minus. Highest single season fantasy grade was a C in 2015 when he was kind of like he was a workhorse back. He had over 100 yards, 1,000 yards from scrimmage and 4 TDs in that year. But he's been out of the league since 2020. And Amir Abdullah, running back for the Detroit Lions, a famous bust for the Detroit Lions.
People thought Amir Abdullah was like a DeAndre Swift, a CMC light type of guy. Not even close.
Michael, why
Not
don't
even close.
you? I really apologize, guys. And if this is turning you off, I understand. I really apologize. This is would gross me out too. Michael, why don't you go over some of the other notable players that were taken? Now, this is round 3 and on. In this particular draft, you would have been completely good if you were in a dynasty league by having a late first round pick. And what the lesson I want you to
Second,
take
third.
right. The lesson I want you to take from this today is don't automatically think trading up is going to get you the better prospect. Michael, why don't you go over, while I cough my lungs out, some of the players who were drafted round 3 through round 6 and then went undrafted?
Yeah, this is pretty cool to look back at the hidden gems in certain drafts, as these guys would certainly fall under that. I think round 3, Tyler Lockett, huge hit for the Seattle Seahawks. Has been a career Seahawk and has had some tremendous seasons. One of the like the best technicians in the game. Like I don't think anybody dislikes the way Tyler Lockett plays the game, and has had several A minus or plus seasons in his career. Tevin Coleman made the list. He had a couple big seasons mixed with Devontae Freeman. Was never a star, but certainly worth a round 3 price tag and worth better than guys like Amir Abdullah and TJ Yeldon. Um, Duke Johnson in round 3. Duke Johnson out of Miami. This guy torched other star Miami running backs in terms of career production in Miami. Was never really able to turn it into a huge career, but has always been around. He's still around. Next year, somehow Duke Johnson's going to have a running back one game. I guarantee it. And then the final pick in round 3 was one of the biggest seasons we've seen in a running back in recent memory. Tim's dude led him to a championship in our home league. Tim will never, ever. I could keep saying ever if you want, but I'm going to stop now. Let us live that down. That's David Johnson, who
You
had
don't
that.
let me live that down because I acquired David Johnson in a post draft trade for Shady McCoy and Frank Gore,
Yeah, it was a
and
bullshit trade.
who ended as RB4 and RB12 overall that season. But I got a guy who ended up being the RB1 by far and would have been a RB1 and wide receiver one in the same year that year. One of the best fantasy seasons maybe ever.
Yeah, so shout out to David Johnson in round 3 as well, who had obviously a huge season that one year that gave him probably an A+ grade in that year. I don't have it in front of me, but I'd assume so. He absolutely dominated. In round 4, we got a couple guys who stand out, not overly stand out, but stand out nonetheless. One of them is slot wide receiver extraordinaire who put in work with Kirk Cousins and Ryan Fitzpatrick a little bit, and that's Jamison Crowder of the now Buffalo Bills, who had his career is basically toast
My wide receiver
at
3
this
that
point.
season that I won the championship. And fun fact, my first ever sleeper on the first ever Brodo episode we've ever recorded. He was my sleeper candidate for the season. So big hit on that one right off the bat.
And then Mike Davis, who was being drafted as a 5th, 6th round pick 2 years ago, who is one of the easiest fades of all time, but had some big games, and for a 4th round pick was not terrible. I'm actually a little surprised to see that he was a 4th round pick. I always thought he was a lower round pick for the hype that he got as like an underdog. 4th round pick isn't that huge of an underdog.
At
But
this
shout out
time, it was a
nonetheless.
little. The context has changed since this time.
That's
Like
true.
4th round is kind of like being a 5th round running back
Yeah.
now.
In round 5, arguably the biggest hit
Not, I
Easily,
think unarguably.
easily the biggest hit if we're looking at career productivity relative to draft pick as well. And that's Stephon Diggs, the current alpha wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, had several nice seasons in Minnesota and has really taken off since he ended up in Buffalo. Obviously, multiple A seasons at this point. Just a very, very, very good player. Round 5 out of Maryland. Shout out to him. Jay Ajayi, the quasi dads on Twitter, cannot believe I'm saying his name. A lot of you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but we used to get into beef about Jay Ajayi because people just wouldn't let him live him down. And I was like, what are you guys, his dads or something? And that's where that comes from. But yeah, Jay Ajayi.
That made a lot of people on Twitter angry at us.
Yeah, Jay Ajayi, he had flashes, but was never able to put it all together. He dealt with injuries, and you know, who knows what could have been if he stayed fully healthy. And then the tight end Tim was talking about, CJ Uzama in the 5th round, the New York Jet great, former Cincinnati Bengal great. CJ Uzama for a 5th round tight end carved out a little bit of a nice career, I'd say.
CJ, can you use him?
Ayo. Use him. Tyler
Use
Conklin
him.
instead. That's what the Jets said. And then in round 6, wide receiver Darren Waller. That's right. He was drafted as a wide receiver. Later switched to the tight end position. Dealt with the substance abuse problems earlier in his career. Made a roaring comeback, and as you know, has established himself as one of the premier tight ends in the league. He hasn't done it for a super extended period of time. And he is a little bit on the older side now, dealing with injuries. Hopefully, he could get right now that he's playing for the New York Giants. But had a reached the A level in his big season, his big breakout season in Las Vegas when he was a forgotten player during that time. He was going undrafted in some fantasy drafts. He was considered like a dart throw type of guy, and he really broke out. So shout out to Darren Waller, and then a couple undrafted free agents who have to get a little bit of love. Raheem Mostert, who's still out here balling, just signed another contract with Miami. I mean, one of the best pure runners in the league who just can't stay healthy. But when he is healthy, the man balls.
One of the fastest human beings I've ever seen. Definitely in the NFL right now. He's just so fast.
Yeah. Next up, quarterback Taylor Heineke, who never made it onto an NFL field before the XFL field, and then established himself, and then got signed, and now we know he's one of the premier backup replacement QBs in the league, and just a ton of fun to watch, and has done very well for Washington over the last several years. So shout out to Taylor Heineke. Tyrell the
It should be
Gazelle.
it should be said as well that he signed a contract with the Falcons that is way higher than the backup contracts that we saw giving out. The backups have been making around $4 million a year annually, including Baker Mayfield, who got that kind of contract. Heineke signed a 2-year, $14 million contract, including a $4 million signing bonus and a roster bonus of $1 million. So
Yeah.
he has a higher base salary than these other backup quarterbacks got in like incentive laden salary. So definitely
Proven
in
himself as a
contention.
legit backup quarterback.
Yeah, he's with the Falcons now. So his competition is Desmond Ridder. I mean, definitely in contention to start next year.
Yeah.
If the Falcons stay put, which I don't know why they're not in the Lamar Jackson sweepstakes, but
And then one of my dudes, Tyrell the Gazelle Williams, who broke out in early in his career with the Los Angeles Chargers, showing off his speed, then dealt with several injuries and was just never able to recapture that juice, and ended up being a shortened career for Tyrell the Gazelle. But again, he was big, he was fast, and he had that one big season. But as an undrafted free agent, it's always cool to see those guys come out of nowhere and establish themselves as threats, even if it's for a short period of time, which also aligns with running back Thomas Rawls.
Hold on real quick. These two, Michael, Terrell Williams was for you. I didn't know whether to put him on this, and I was like, you know what, Michael has a great nickname for him. I'm gonna put him on here.
Tyrell the Gazelle, who's the man, yo.
Thomas Rawls is for me.
Yes. I wonder why. Maybe because he helped you in the year that you won with David Johnson and Jamison Crowder.
Not only that, I told you guys like,
now I know
how
why
did you let me? How did you let me get Thomas Rawls? How did you do it? How did you let me? I actually chose 2015 because That's how far our grades go back.
Oh, remember Tim Thomas Rawls ended up on the Jets too.
Yeah,
Got some run with the Jets.
he did. Yeah, one of my favorite all times. It's like a little bowling ball out there.
Yeah.
All
And
right,
that's
Mike.
the recap.
All right, Mike. Fantasy wise, if we're doing another startup right now for Dynasty, let's redraft. Let's assume that these guys went in the order that they went because of their hype. Let's redraft it. Um, I'll take the first pick because I'm in charge
One
of this
question,
this pick.
Tim.
Yeah.
Are we drafting Darren Waller knowing he'd have to sit on our bench for years, or are we drafting Darren Waller as his current self?
So here's what we're going to say. We're going to say now that we know who they are, let's act like we don't know what their careers went like,
Okay.
if that's possible, and
Based on who they are.
based on their grade. Like if you only
Cool.
got their grade, let's go from there. All right.
Okay.
So first pick, Stephon Diggs. He had the longevity. He's an All-Pro. He's gonna keep doing it. Easy pick here for me. Stephon Diggs, pick number 1.
I mean, I'm going Todd Gurley. He has the best 2 seasons by far, league winning type seasons. Even though it was a shortened career, when you get those two types of seasons out of a player, I mean, he won several dynasty managers their league, and even if it was cut short and they weren't able to capitalize on it for too long, you definitely were not mad at spending a pick on Todd Gurley, and I'd still pick him second after Stephon Diggs.
This is the toughest one for me. I could either go like what with the logic that you just said, and take David Johnson and take his great season, 2 very good fantasy seasons, but 1 great season, or I could take Tyler Lockett, who's been an absolute beast throughout his career. I'm going to go with Tyler Lockett. I'm going to go with the longevity. I believe in my ability to build a team around those 2 guys. So Tyler Lockett, pick number 2.
Pick number 3.
Yes, pick number 3. Sorry.
You know, Tim, I'll let you have David Johnson. I'm going to go a similar route because I'm typically the wide receiver guy. It would just be wrong for me to pick 2 running backs off the, the cuff or whatever they say. Amari Cooper. Look, he has not been spectacular by any means, but he's been a very, very solid wide receiver 2 for seemingly every single season in his career. So dynasty wise, if you drafted Amari Cooper, you never got that superstar season out of him or that superstar type production. But you're not mad having Amari Cooper on your team.
All right, so here's a tough one because there's 2 running backs on the board right now that both had monster seasons that could lead you to a championship. So I'm going to go differently. I'm going to go with Darren Waller here. I'm going to lock up my tight end spot. I'm going to let you pick whatever running back you want for the next one, and then I'm just going to take the other guy. Darren Waller, pick number 5.
Melvin Gordon or David Johnson is a super difficult question. It's really the several seasons or the single absolutely monster season. I'm going to go Melvin Gordon just because his very good season, 96.7 grade, it wasn't David Johnson's career year, but it was still very good and worthy of winning championships. And that wasn't his only very good season. Like you said, that 3-year combo of 38 touchdowns is not something to, shy away from. So I'm taking Melvin Gordon over the short-lived career of David Johnson.
I will say this, Mike. If you would have put those 2 together, you would say that your other running back, Todd Gurley, and David Johnson's best seasons overlapped.
You're not losing with those 2.
No, that's a championship. So I'll take Todd Gurley to fight. Not Todd Gurley. I'll take David Johnson to fight against your Todd Gurley with the next
Fair
pick
enough.
overall.
Fair enough. Now I'm going to go Jameis Winston. I'll take that. Early in his career was when he was useful. Knowing what we know now, I mean, 30 touchdowns, 30 interception season. He was QB5 overall. He had an A+ fantasy grade. He was absolutely a startable asset. Maybe you flipped him after that year and got a good return. Maybe you didn't, and it went down the shitter. But if you're looking at the QB position, to get a guy who's going to finish QB5 overall, have these huge QB1 type of spike weeks, I'll take Jameis now that all the positional assets that actually stood out are gone.
It's a tough one now because we're getting into the thick. We're getting into the gross.
Into the thick of it.
So I'm going to come out of the muck with Jay Ajay. I'm gonna go with Jay Ajay here. Jay Ajay had 2 seasons of very good fantasy production. I gotta somehow uh, compete with your Todd Gurley, Melvin Gordon. I'll tell you, if someone had Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon a few years ago, that was basically a guaranteed championship. So I'm gonna try and fight you as best I can with David Johnson and Jay Ajay at the running back position.
I like it. I'm gonna follow up that with Jamison Crowder. Get the slot PPR extraordinaire. He had several wide receiver 2, 3 type seasons. A pretty long career for someone who's, again, he's like him and Jarvis Landry. If you look at their peripherals, their athleticism and such, it's gross. But that just goes to show you that that's not everything. Like college production matters, and production in general matters. And Jamison Crowder was not the biggest, not the strongest, not the fastest, but the man knew how to get open, and he proved it year over year for several seasons.
My next pick is going to be a guy who ended up being a bust for the second overall pick, but did end up being the second best quarterback. Oh no, there is a quarterback that I've forgotten. No, that's in the next. That's in the next draft class, but did end up being the second best quarterback in this draft class, and that is Marcus Mariota.
I don't know. You could argue Taylor Heineke is better than him,
I'll
if
go
we're
with
being
Marcus
honest.
Mariota.
Just saying, you could argue that. If you're going Mariota, I will follow that up with a little bit of Tevin Coleman action. I think the last guy who really had some helpful seasons, and who knows if we drafted him in 2015 and he ended up somewhere other than Atlanta, not with Devontae Freeman, or if something happened to Devontae Freeman, maybe Tevin Coleman would have stood out even more. So I'm taking the upside in Tevin Coleman.
Now I know this guy's not going to play for a while, but that's okay because I got 2 running backs that burnt out quick. I'm gonna go with Raheem Mostert here with my next pick to get a little legacy pick there.
Nice. I will follow that up with Tyrell the Gazelle. Him and Devontae Parker both had one-off seasons, but I just like Tyrell the Gazelle better, and he was the UDFA. So shout out Tyrell the Gazelle.
Devontae Parker. For me, I'll take some kind of halfway decent production.
All right, give me Duke Johnson then. A little
All right.
PPR action.
I'm going to say we stop drafting here
Fair enough.
because none of these guys should have even been on a roster after that.
I win. Because I win.
Shout out to Adam Sandler.
Big Daddy.
All right. It was great being back on the mic with you, Mike.
Call me Frankenstein.
All right, Frankenstein. It was great. Did you dress yourself today?
I did.
I could tell. Did you?
I wiped my own ass.
With that being said, Michael, would you rather eat a plate full of snails?
Yo,
that have
escargot is delicious.
You're bugging.
You don't like escargot, bro?
I hate escargot.
Put it in like that pesto sauce that they
Ugh.
do. Get it out the shell. Are you nuts? Yo, your
Well,
palate is trash.
I'm not done. But would you rather eat snails but not escargot?
Just
raw
snails.
snails.
I don't know. That hurts the soul
Raw
a little bit. I
snails.
used to have a pet snail.
Would you eat him? Or would you rather be a vegan for 2 years?
I'd eat raw snails.
Yeah, well, veganism, that's not for us. Later.
Yeah.